tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening.
John Deere is struggling under the weight of President Trump's economic policy.
So this is what I think about Crown Oil. That's what they could do. And I think everyone else should do the same thing. Start supporting companies that make whiskey here by Ontario people. That's what we need to do, is support each other.
It's definitely caused a hit to our business.
American liquor sales have plummeted since some provinces began boycotting and pulling U.S. products right off their shelves. The company, which sold more than $23 million worth of product in 2024 alone, says the move will bring them closer to their core customer base.
The timing couldn't be worse for many American whiskey producers. One study showing the industry recently saw a nearly 2% drop in revenue.
We will respond like they've never seen before.
I think it's going to do a lot to keep our industry thriving.
Tariff war broke out. We had no idea, obviously. We planned for a good year in Canada, and in March, the tariff war broke out. And all of a sudden, it resulted in us being off the shelves in many of the major provinces in Canada. So we were essentially out of business in much of Canada overnight. And I can tell you right away, we started thinking about how do we solve for this? And that's what led to us exploring Canadian production.
At Michter's Distillery in Louisville, iconic Kentucky bourbon is distilled, aged, bottled, and shipped to more than 80 countries. Their largest foreign market, Canada, where most provinces are now defiantly pulling American liquor from store shelves.
An American liquor company is moving shop to Montreal.
And as of March, when this tariff war broke out, we got pulled off the shelves in many of the provinces of Canada.
You know, we just don't need their product. And yet they survive off the fact that we do 95% of what they do.
Vast majority, about 98%, is sold in Canada. And so, in many ways, we think of it as being a Canadian brand. And so all the more reason we should produce it in Canada. We've moved to Canada and are proud of it.
That product is just sitting here in Michter's warehouse with Canada-specific labels on these bottles in English and in French. They don't know what to do with this. And if nothing changes, they fear their losses will grow.
Doug Ford isn't backing down, folks, and he's making that crystal clear. The Ontario Premier dropped this bombshell telling reporters that American booze isn't coming back to LCBO shelves anytime soon. Ford said, quote, if there's a deal, another USMCA deal, which I don't think is going to happen for next few months, but you never know with President Trump. He could pull the carpet out from underneath us in a heartbeat like he has before, or they get rid of their tariffs and then we'll bring the booze back into the LCBO. And if they don't, then they aren't getting any booze on our shelves. That's about as hardline as it gets. Ford is basically telling Trump to shove his tariffs where the sun don't shine. Well, folks, one American company just proved Ford's strategy is working better than anyone expected. Before we dive into this story, I want to thank everyone who's been watching and supporting the channel. We've been growing like crazy covering this trade war, and your comments have been absolutely fantastic. If you're getting value from this coverage, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any updates on how Canada is winning this fight. The Sour Puss surrender. How Canada forced an American company to abandon Minnesota. Phillips Distilling Company just waved the white flag in the most humiliating way possible. This Minnesota-based company that makes Sour Puss liqueur has completely capitulated to Canadian pressure and moved their entire production operation to Montreal. Let me repeat that. An American company just abandoned American workers to set up shop in Canada because Doug Ford and other premiers refused to sell their products. CEO Andy England admitted they had absolutely no choice in the matter. When the provincial boycotts hit in March, Phillips Distilling got pulled off shelves across major Canadian provinces overnight. England told reporters, quote, we were essentially out of business in much of Canada overnight. And I can tell you right away, we started thinking about how do we solve for this? Here's the devastating part for America. 98% of Sour Puss sales were in Canada before this boycott hit. 98%, folks. This wasn't some minor export market. This was their entire business model. Phillips Distilling sold over 150,000 cases of liquor products in Canada in 2024 alone, and 100,000 of those were Sour Puss. That's over $23 million in business that just evaporated because of Trump's tariffs. The company spent months desperately searching for a solution. England said they looked at 19 different plants across North America before finally settling on Station 22 Distillery in Montreal. Think about that. They considered 19 different options, and the best choice was to abandon Minnesota entirely and set up shop in Canada. The timeline here shows just how quickly this unfolded. The boycott started in March, when provinces pulled American alcohol worth $500 million in lost revenue off their shelves. By May, England was personally visiting Montreal to negotiate the deal. By December, they were starting production in Canada. That's 9 months from boycott to complete surrender. Station 22. Distillery is now producing Phillips Distilling products for the Canadian market, including their Butter Ripple and, of course, Sour Puss. The irony is thick here, folks. Trump imposed tariffs to bring manufacturing back to America, and instead, he's literally driving American companies to move their production to Canada. England tried to put a positive spin on it, saying they're picking up replacement business in Minnesota, but let's be honest about what happened here. Over 150,000 cases of production just left American soil because Canadian premiers like Doug Ford played hardball and won. The company admits they still have no guarantee that Canadian provinces will put their products back on shelves, even with Canadian production, but they're betting that being made in Canada will be enough to satisfy the boycott requirements. This represents something we rarely see in trade wars, a clear manufacturing win for Canada. While other industries have seen companies threaten to move south because of uncertainty, here we have an American company actually packing up and moving north because they got completely outmaneuvered by provincial alcohol policies. The economics of humiliation. Why this move proves Canada's trade war strategy works. Let's break down the numbers here because they tell the real story of how Canada just schooled America in economic warfare. The liquor industry has a unique vulnerability that Canadian premiers exploited perfectly. Unlike most consumer goods that flow through private retailers, alcohol sales in Canada are controlled by government-run stores like the LCBO in Ontario and the SAQ in Quebec. This gave Doug Ford and other premiers a nuclear option that most industries don't have. When they decided to pull American alcohol products, they weren't asking private businesses to voluntarily boycott, they were using direct government control to shut out American companies overnight. That's $500 million in American alcohol that disappeared from Canadian shelves with the stroke of a pen. Phillips Distilling found themselves in an impossible position. They couldn't negotiate with thousands of individual store owners or launch marketing campaigns to win back customers. They had to deal with a handful of provincial governments who had already made their political calculation. As long as Trump's tariffs stayed in place, American booze was persona non grata. The financial pressure was immediate and brutal. Andy England described being pulled off shelves in major provinces as decimating their business. When 98% of your sales come from a market that just shut you out completely, you don't have months to figure out alternatives. You have weeks before you're looking at bankruptcy. What makes this even more humiliating for America is that other American alcohol companies are getting crushed by the exact same strategy. The Distilled Spirits Council of the United States admits their business has been impacted by 65% since the boycotts began. That's not a minor trade dispute. That's an industry-wide catastrophe caused by Trump's own tariff policies. The irony here is almost too perfect. Trump imposed tariffs on Canadian goods, claiming it would bring manufacturing jobs back to America. Instead, his tariffs triggered retaliatory boycotts that are now forcing American companies to move their manufacturing to Canada, Phillips Distilling is literally creating Canadian jobs while eliminating American ones because of Trump's trade war. Canada's strategy worked because they targeted an industry where government control gives them maximum leverage. Private companies can't easily replace government-controlled distribution networks. Phillips Distilling couldn't just find new customers, they had to find new countries. The exchange rate situation makes this even sweeter for Canada. American companies moving production north get the benefit of a weaker Canadian dollar while gaining access to the boycotted markets. It's a double win that makes the economics of relocating almost irresistible for companies in Phillips Distilling's position. This represents exactly the kind of strategic thinking that separates effective trade policy from Trump's chaotic approach. Instead of imposing broad tariffs and hoping for the best, Canadian premiers identified specific vulnerabilities in American supply chains and exploited them with surgical precision. The blueprint for other companies: should more U.S. businesses follow Sour Puss to Canada? Phillips Distilling just provided a roadmap that other American companies are probably studying right now. The question isn't whether this strategy makes sense, it's which companies are desperate enough to follow suit. Any American business that depends heavily on Canadian sales and faces similar boycott pressure should be looking at this move very seriously. The alcohol industry isn't the only sector where Canadian governments have direct purchasing power or regulatory control. Defense contractors, infrastructure companies, and agricultural exporters all face similar vulnerabilities if Canadian governments decide to play hardball. The advantages Canada offers go beyond just avoiding boycotts. The skilled workforce that Phillips Distilling found at Station 22 Distillery isn't unique to Montreal. Canada has manufacturing capacity across multiple industries that could absorb American companies looking to relocate. The favorable exchange rate means American companies can often reduce their production costs while maintaining quality. Tax complications are real, but they're not insurmountable. England mentioned spending months with PricewaterhouseCoopers working through the implications, but ultimately decided the business case was strong enough to justify the complexity. For companies facing complete loss of Canadian markets, complex tax situations beat no revenue at all. The political implications of American companies choosing Canada over Trump's America could become a major campaign issue. Every job that moves north because of the trade war becomes ammunition for Trump's critics, Phillips Distilling. Moving 150,000 cases of production represents dozens of American manufacturing jobs that are now Canadian manufacturing jobs. If this trend continues, we could see a reverse brain drain where American companies relocate not just production, but research and development operations to Canada. The stability of Canadian trade relationships compared to Trump's unpredictable approach could make Canada an attractive hedge against future trade disruptions. The message this sends about coordinated provincial boycotts is probably the most important takeaway. Doug Ford and other premiers just proved that targeted economic pressure can force American companies to completely restructure their operations. That's a playbook other countries are definitely taking notes on. For American companies, the calculation is becoming clear. You can either hope Trump's trade wars end quickly, or you can start looking at Canadian alternatives now before you're forced into crisis mode like Phillips Distilling was. Conclusion: Canada's quiet victory in the trade war. While Trump tweets and threatens, Canada is winning through calculated economic pressure that's actually moving jobs and production north. This is what effective trade strategy looks like when you target vulnerabilities instead of throwing around random tariffs. Drop a comment and tell me which other American companies you think should follow Phillips Distilling to Canada. Hit subscribe for more coverage of how Canada keeps outmaneuvering Trump in this trade war.